Now we're going to get to garlic, and it took reading Ron England's book to understand the beginning of the categories of garlic. And it's actually kind of ironic. Over the years, I've grown lots of great garlic, and I bought seed from different sources. Did I get garlic seed from you at one point? Did you have really nice garlic seed for a while?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, okay, well, I got it from various people, and they would reproduce it, and I had no idea what strain I was growing. I didn't even know there were names, you know? And then sometime, I guess in the late 90s, I started hearing names. If you read Ron England, there's a certain number of categories, but as I did my research, they now have 10 different varieties. And we'll cover those in a moment. But the two major divisions are the stiffnecks, and that's got that delightful name there, Orpheoscororodone or whatever. And then the softneck, which is, all of them are Allium sativum, but then the softneck is actually Allium sativum sativum. Ironically, they're pretty sure that the original plant was a stiffneck, and yet the non-stiffneck gets the original name. I don't understand. Taxonomists, they drive me crazy. You know, their logic, I can't follow it. Anyway, we've had spectacular luck with German hardy, or German extra hardy, also known as New York hardy. A lot of garlics have multiple names, and we get it from Fraser's Garlic Farm in New York. And we usually only get it only if we're trying to expand our production, or we had an event, which I'll describe when I talk about problems, where we had to just not use our crop because we were going to have a problem carry over. And so we had to buy another 120 pounds or so. So once we do that, we can easily save from how much we grow 150 pounds or 200 pounds, and then we have plenty to grow out. And this guy is a stiffneck. It's a porcelain. It's one of the ones that makes the serpentine garlic scape. So we have tons of those too. And it's not uncommon. You can kind of see there to have them be like this. They're really big. And since I like a lot of garlic, there'll be 6 cloves in that guy. So I don't have to peel 3 cloves to put all the garlic I want to put in. For people that don't like a lot of garlic, it's kind of a pain because you're cutting them in thirds or something, But it's not a problem for me. That's that garlic drying. And we'll talk about how important it is to cure if you want it to keep. But first we're going to talk about the varieties and then how to grow it. So there are 10 varieties, right? There are 5 stiffneck, 3 weakly bolting stiffnecks, and those are mostly ones that are grown in warmer places. We don't grow a lot of those here, like Creole is one of those. There's an exception to the rule with garlic because there's so many variations of it. And indeed, everybody who writes about it emphasizes that as you select, you're developing your own land race. So the qualities that were there over time are changing. So if you have been saving your own garlic for a long time, it's no longer as exactly the same as the clone that you originally started with, because you're selecting for properties that you like. And then 2 softnecks. And the softnecks, you'll see in an upcoming slide, I'm going to revisit because they talk about how big you can get them. What I've learned is that until I prepared for this class, I stopped buying anything except for German white or German extra hardy, because it did so well. Recently, just because I thought, I should diversify a little, I've been buying maybe 5 or 10 pounds of German red, which is a similar porcelain. And it also does well for us, but I can't get the guys to pay attention, so I have to plant it somewhere else so they mix it in. And then I don't have it separate anyways. But I want to grow a softneck because I like braiding garlic. Giving braids of garlic as a gift is really kind of a joy. And I think I left the picture up at the house, but I have a picture of the huge crops that we got with softnecks in California, where I had no trouble growing them. And we actually grew them as a group in people's backyards. And we meant to rotate the crops in the backyards, but it was dangerous because once you gave somebody a braid of garlic, they only wanted garlic. They like getting vegetables. That braid of garlic they could hang on the wall and talk about and brag on. So we'd have to give them garlic from other backyards so we could do our rotation because it's real appealing. So I'm going to investigate that. The stiffnecks have always done better for me here in the mountains. I think they can take the cold better. They're more vigorous. But when I read, everybody says that the silver skin does better. The other reason why I want to start growing the artichoke type and the silver skin type, which are the 2 stiffnecks, is that they're notably longer keeping. And we have varying degrees of success with keeping. As I said, we had a problem. It's called the leaf curl mite last winter, not this winter, but last when we didn't have heavy cold rains. And that meant that our garlic was not keeping past like February. And that's a drag because we want it to last us, we want to still be eating it in April anyways. So that by the end of April, when the last of the garlic is not worth dealing with anymore, we're eating garlic scapes. And then we eat garlic scapes, which will last forever in your fridge until the new garlic comes in. And we have a walk-in, so we can get away with that. But I highly recommend, if you grow these garlics, taking advantage of every scape. You can pickle them, you can can them, you can freeze them. I'm sure you could dry them. And it can be the bridge you want to keep you from one garlic crop to the next. But maybe I'll learn how to grow a soft neck that will last 12 months. There's one that's listed as lasting 12 months. That's the one I want. So we'll talk about that next. And I have experience with it, but it's a long time ago. Okay, so 10 varieties, 5 stiff necks, porcelains, 3 types of purple stripes. So the purple glazer, all those different ones that are purple striped, there's 3 different types of that. One's purple stripe, one's purple glazer, and one's purple marble stripe. And there are different names for them all, and I just wasn't going to try and fill up the slides with all that. But if you go online and look at it, you can find it. I'm pretty sure I also put that link in there, so you can just check the link. It's a really great garlic site, and look at all the different kinds. And my experience is that once I started growing the German white, everybody else would talk to me about the other ones they were growing, and I'd go look at their garlics, and their garlics were like that. My garlics were like this, and so I'm an American, right? I want big, Now, it's good for me to teach classes like this because I read and stuff, and of course big isn't always the best. It might well be that there's more nutrients in the other ones, though it seems like there's a lot of nutrition in the German white. But I'm going to revisit that now. It was good for me to put this class together now, and it's time to go back to more diversity. Diversity is always a good thing. Maybe one of those would have withstood the wheat curl mite better. Though we actually did get a tolerable harvest. We still got some big garlics. It just didn't keep very well. Okay, and then there's the weakly bolding stiff-necked varieties. I have no experience with the Asiatic or the turbans, but I have helped our farm in Florida to grow the Creoles. And basically you want to grow the Creoles in Florida. You're not going to do well with you might do well with some of the artichokes, but you're not going to do it all well with the stiff-necks down there. It's just not, the day length is wrong, the temperature's wrong, and they're just not going to do well. And so the Creoles are going to do better. And then in California, I will find that picture. I know we are growing either an artichoke or a silver skin. And it did spectacularly well, and we got them really big. But I have not managed that here. The ones that I've grown here are California early, California late. In one year, there's been a few years, if you're garlic growers, you might have paid attention to them if you didn't buy your seed early enough. By the middle of September, you couldn't buy seed. I mean, it just wasn't available. It was sold out. And so I found a source for California early, and I put it in. I didn't get it in until sometime in November because I didn't find it till late. And then I did everything I used to do, which I gave them a lot more nitrogen in those days. I got them big, but they were weird as all heck. They had all these little side bulbs on them, and they just weren't marketable. I mean, they were marketable to my supporters, but the person walking by who I don't know is going to look at it and go, oh, that's weird, and go buy garlic from somebody else, And since I was growing it to sell, it wasn't a winner, And I don't really recommend California early here. Indeed, I have some out there because I wanted to grow them and show that they could be used for braiding. And they're pretty pathetic, folks. But once again, all bets are off with all the rain we had. I don't think any of the trials I did, it's a fair year to judge how well things perform because that rain was above and beyond our normal spring. Though Ron England in Growing Great Garlic talks about the huge advantage that Western growers have. Because it dries out in the springtime. And that's an ideal climate for garlic. And by the way, a brief nod to Vavlov, I forget his first name, but Vavlov was the Russian scientist who rotted away in a Stalinist prison because he questioned Lysenko's theory about being able to affect genetics with temperatures and stuff. He was the original researcher. He went all over the world and found the zones of diversity for all kinds of plants. And I noticed there was one garlic named, it had Vavlov in the name. It might have been a shallot, actually. But it probably, most every family of plants, there's a Vavlov somewhere because he was a big mind in figuring out how plants worked. And basically, it's kind of a crescent from northern China through to the Ukraine, dipping down into the Caucasus and stuff. And that area is where they think that the garlics and the onions got their start, where the great diversity is. Interestingly, there's another little zone of diversity for certain types of onions in South America. So the varieties I've had experience with, you've already heard that I love German Hardy. It just does spectacularly well. And indeed, the farm that we buy from when we need seed, Frazier's Garlic Farm in New York, they grow way more of that than anything else. and I highly recommend their seed. It's very high quality. German red is pretty similar, not quite as big, but still very nice, pretty darn foolproof. Music is really popular, and you can get that big. What's ironic about that now, and I'm sure it has to do with sulfur and temperature, it's listed in some things as being a much milder, like the rest of the stiff necks are notably fiery. It's listed as being milder, but I was reading reviews saying how hot it was. So it's like, yes, there's genetics, but there's also conditions, nature and nurture. And if the nurture is harsh, the music is probably going to be, punk. And then Creole, which is basically for further south for the heat, and it can get nice. And then I bet that they even say that California early and California late is what we saw in the stores for years when we were growing up. Remember those little boxes of 2 little bulbs of garlic in it and stuff? That was California early, and they can get big too, but not here. But probably better grower than I, or a luckier grower than I.
What things are leading to California and Germany, there's been a lot of press about the Chinese garlic. And just stay away from it. Is that propaganda?
Well, okay, so right now we have a bunch of bug problems because of our trade with China. Spotted wing Drosophila, thank you, China. The Chinese didn't do it, but with that kind of trade, that comes in. So that'd be a reason to stay away because yeah, they're trying to control things at the borders, but this is the volume of trade from China when they're trading agricultural products, it's way high. And all it takes is one inspector having a bad day, right? And it's in.
They're requiring them to remove all the roots.
Well, okay, so like wheat chromite, it's not living on the roots, So frankly, I'm not a fan of long-distance agricultural imports, and it's not xenophobia, it's ecology. If we weren't subsidizing oil, I don't care how efficient ships are, unless they're run with sails, which actually they're getting into the potential for sails that are computer run, and maybe someday that'll make sense. Right now, it makes no sense for us to be eating food that comes from China. Something that we can't grow here. If they could grow coffee that was great in China, then I'd say sure. And I'm sure there are certain things, certain medicinal, herbs and stuff, maybe. But ecologically, I don't think it makes any sense. And of course, we've seen a lot of our, like the apple growers and stuff, really devastated by competition from China.
Oranges.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So but that's a different discussion. We're not going to talk about trade now, but ecologically, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And I wouldn't buy it.
In Tennessee, I'm just.
Yeah, right, yeah. The local within a 100-mile thing, I don't have use for that either. I think that there's always been trade. They were using seashells for money way inside the United States. So there's always been trade, but the trade should be ecologically logical. If it's not ecologically logical, I don't think it has a future, and I think it imperils our future. This class has me wanting to try it. Allium red, because of its noted flavor and size. I got to confess, why I haven't tried it is I had friends that were growing it, and they'd show me it, and it's like, they're showing me garlics this big. And I'm like, I want big garlic, but maybe I should pay attention to flavor. And this one supposedly is able to get big, so maybe I just have to learn how to grow it. Italian softneck, it's supposed to have good size. Storage is supposed to be very good, and what I like is that the seed came from New York, which means it's probably adapted better to the mountains. It's being reproduced up at Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, which by the way is one of the resources I highly recommend. We're going to look at a bunch of perennial onions out there. I got them from Ira Wallace. She was kind enough to send them to me at no charge. They're a cooperative seed exchange. They grow stuff that's right for the South. They're growing it themselves. They're paying attention. Their information is excellent. Their quality is excellent. And their diversity for the Southeast is really excellent.
They have the Italian softnet?
Yeah, they do. The silver skin, silver white silver skin, it's a soft neck with a mild flavor once again. Maybe not, but theoretically a mild flavor, which would be nice to have sometimes, so I don't need it very often. And up to 12 months storage, that's what made me pay attention. You have to do things right to get that kind of storage. You can't take it out. I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I have mistakenly thought I could just put my garlic on bread racks in my very shady shed that was at the bottom of a hill with a dirt floor in the summer when it rained all the time. Came back, there wasn't any garlic. It was just all gone, And of course I was used to summers where it rained some and there was plenty of sun, but this was one of our summers. The garlic was gone. And indeed, Ed Frazier talks about how he contracts with other people because he can't grow enough garlic now. And he grows certified organic, but he just tells them how to grow organic and checks. And so you can buy sustainably grown from him that's grown by other people. And he had a neighbor that had a couple, like $120,000 worth of garlic in. It was probably, I think it was 2013. It was raining up there too. And she didn't listen to him. She didn't get a generator and actually set up fans and try to get it. And she lost the whole crop. So you do have to aggressively dry garlic in those wet years. Mediterranean climate, no problem. Yeah, you can just hang it on the wall. It'll dry great. Here, 2013, good luck with that one. Killarney red hardneck, no tolerance to wet conditions. Well, that'd be good to have. Though actually, it depends on when it's coming in. We get driven nuts by rain coming about 2 or 3 weeks from now because our garlic just cruised through all that rain. Why? Because it was just putting its scapes up then. It hadn't gotten too mature. But once it's at a certain maturity, boy, you got to pull it before it's ready. You got to accept less size or it's all split apart and isn't going to keep. Just too much rain. And then try to clean it when it's that wet. It's it's no fun at all. But that happens here. And that's a price we pay for living on the East Coast, which by the way, I lived in California. I moved back here because it didn't rain in the summertime. I like that summer rain. I like those thunderstorms. I'll live with that humidity. I like the fireflies. They don't have them out there. But anyways, and large size. So that sounds pretty darn good to me. And then the Turkish red hardneck, large bulbs, stores longer than most. And a hardneck that stores longer than most would be appealing. So I intend to play with those this year. Put in maybe 5 pounds of each or something and just see how they do. Okay. Leeks, and by the way, this picture, I didn't have a good picture of mature leeks, so this comes from the Creative Commons, so I had to attribute it. Allium, porum. Summer leeks, King Richard's, Megatron kind of, I guess, will work like a summer leek too, and supposedly it's very productive, and I think it's a hybrid. I don't need hybrids in leeks. There's certain things, I'm not a purist. There are things like, zephyr squash and stuff that I'm going to grow all the time, even though they're hybrids, because they're so productive, they're so precocious, they're so pretty. But leeks, I haven't seen a big enough difference to bother. So if I can just grow open pollinated, I'd rather. And so most of these are open pollinated. I think one of them might not be, and I'm trying to remember which one it is. Maybe not. These might all be open pollinated, except for the Megatron. King Richard really rocks, and they say it's not hardy, but you can keep it in the ground around here into December. With the exception of the occasional November, I think every 8 years or so, we'll get a November where it comes screaming in cold in early November. It hits 15 in the first week or something. These guys are gone if that happens, They say they won't do well below 20. I've seen them go below 20 if they can slowly adjust. And indeed, if you put row cover over them, you can keep them all the way, all the way through. And then I have not grown Tadorna. It's a Johnny's one. The recommendation sounded really good, so I figured I'd put it on there, but I can't speak to it personally. King Sieg is another one that, these are kind of like fall, early winter. That's the theory. A lot of these I've managed to keep them going into the winter too. But it just depends on the winter. Most of our winters are pretty mild relatively. As you go from the summer ones to the fall, winter ones to the overwintering ones, they go from long, lots of white to stout, wider and much less white because that wants to be in the ground because that's where the damage is greater, And it's always about how you can, something you might consider is growing something like kale or something around them because slowing down, just that, things get colder when they're out in the open and the wind can just whip away all their heat and stuff. So if they're surrounded by something else, they might actually not get damaged as bad. That's speculation, but it works for other things. If you have something nursed by a crop, nurse crops, help things. I was going to say cover crops, but the cover crops wouldn't be high at that time of year, and we'll talk later. It turns out the grains and alliums don't really mix. If you can, and what are we going to do with that? I'm still going to grow a lot of grains because they're rock and cover crops, but maybe ones that have problems, I might try and move them to areas where I don't focus on grains, but grow other winter cover crops besides grains. Because they host, now that I got that far, I'll put it out there. We'll cover it more later. Grains can be a host later in the season to thrips. as can grasses. And thrips are a problem on alliums. And the wheat curl mite. And it's not a problem usually here when we have a winter drought. It's a problem because the cold, heavy rains keep it suppressed. We probably always have low levels of it because we grow grain cover crops, but it's not usually a problem. But some years it can be, as it was for us in 2015 to 16. That winter, we got hit pretty hard by it. What I love about leeks is I've had leeks that I started and didn't get in the ground. I put them in the next year, and they worked. You know, they tend not to bolt if they're tiny. So stunt it, you know, in a flat in the greenhouse, didn't matter. Now, if I put them out in February, stunted so they were only small, but they had the vernalizing, the cold, and then the lengthening days, they'd be going to seed when they're really small. You know, so it doesn't mean you can plant them anytime, but it does mean you don't have to throw away that flat you didn't get in the ground. And they can kind of be, they can go to seed kind of and then come back from their corms. Do people know about the corms? I wish actually I'd sought out a picture of that. This year I'm going to make sure and hold them. So that's another way that some alliums reproduce. They make little bulbs, not top set, but bottom set at the roots, and they're called corms. And so you can pull leeks up and you'll find these little plants down there, are little bulbs that you could plant and be your next onions, next leeks. And you can also come in and just cut them out, and those will grow. And possibly, and this is something to try with any allium, I do it all the time with ramps, come in and give up about that much of the bulb and just cut it out rather than pulling it out. And it's not impossible that it'll regrow. It works with a fair number of, you know, it's a classic, by the way, to do with scallions. You know, you buy scallions from the store, you chop off the bottom roots, just take a little bit less of that, you know, don't cut it quite so close to the roots, leave a little bit of white, pop them in a planter or something, you got green onions a few weeks later. You know, they'll come back. And so you can do that with a lot of things. And actually, I mean to bring it down. Up at the house during a break, years ago, an old Italian gardener, who's probably long gone now, or he's 120 anyways, in California, I had some sprouted onions I was taking out to the compost, and he said, give me that. And he had a knife, and he cut it open, quartered it, and there was a sprout on each quarter. He said, plant that in the ground. You got yourself 4 onions. You know? And he could actually do that. You take a sprouted onion, cut it apart, and, you know, you just look and see how many there were. There were 4 in that one. There might just be 2. And just plant each one with a growing tip, and you've got another onion. So it's just like lots of ways you can do that. Okay, so it used to be, and I don't even see anybody, used to be, do people remember when you had to wash leeks really carefully because there was so much dirt in them? It's because we used to just bury them super deep. Now it's more, we just accept that some are going to have short, big, fat white parts, or you grow the King Richard, which got a really big, long white part, you know. And then the King Sieg is kind of a blend. You know, it's much hardier, but it's got a little bit more length to it than some. So I know some people that still do that, but to me, it's not worth the washing. You know, trying to get, you know, all those, the part that still is white and pale green that we use, but it's got dirt in every little section and stuff. It's like, I don't want to bother, you know. But you can do that, and it will give you a longer white part. And one of the sites I looked at said what I, of course, completely agree with is you wouldn't throw away the tops anyways, would you? Make stock, you know. Plenty of good flavor in the tops too. You wouldn't want to eat them. They're tough, but if you simmer them, now if you boil them, you might alter that flavor some. But if you simmer them, they're going to add to your stock, you know, so you can get a whole lot out of the leeks. And they're another one that can be in the ground for a long time. I mean, a trick to do is to put way more in than you're going to eventually eat, and then thin them to the distance that you finally want. And then so you first have, like, you know, basically little green onion leeks, and later on you have baby leeks that you can grill and put in pastas and stuff. And then you have like moderately sized leeks, and then eventually you have huge leeks, and all that space got used. You know, and I'm actually going to be doing a talk for an event this year where it's about no bare ground, just like maximizing your production. You know, and that's something you can do with leeks. You can actually plant way more. You can, of course, do that with any allium. Just keep thinning them because they can be eaten at any stage. But leeks really lend themselves to that. Okay, so then other varieties, like the fall, early winter ones, are two that are listed there. And I know I couldn't remember other ones I've grown over the years. I basically grow what they sell in the catalogs. I don't like chase down a variety I love because I haven't loved any leeks so much that I probably would chase down King Richard if I lost it because it's such a niche one. You know, it does so well in the warm weather, comes on so fast and gives you that really long, nice white stalk. So I'd probably chase that down. And I might actually, if I couldn't find the blue de Soleils, because I love the color. It just gets this really lovely kind of purple blue. Not that I don't think other ones don't perform as well, you know. But American Flag is around all the time, and that's a great one that overwinters. And then Johnny's had a lot of good stuff to say about Bandit. It's also open pollinated, so I'd recommend that one too. By the way, I recommend that you let a couple of leeks go to seed. I recommend actually you let every allium you grow, let a few go to seed. If they actually make flowers, I don't see any major advantage unless you want to try and reproduce by bulbulos, which is going to take you at least 2 years for letting garlic scapes happen because they're not feeding the beneficial insects. But if you let the things that actually flower go to seed, you will see incredible insect activity around it. And leeks, boy, big flower, tons of insects all over them there. And indeed, that's what I was referring to when I said that chives have many other advantages when they're flowering. I mean, they're just covered up with beneficial insects all summer long because they're flowering all summer long, you know, and they flower kind of late, which is kind of good too.
When other stuff isn't.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's pretty critical. That's what I love about garlic chives too. You know, it's a late flowering plant, and that really counts. Jerusalem artichokes, you know that one, I'm sure if you keep bees, I mean, when the Jerusalem artichokes are in bloom, nothing else is getting any attention, you know, and there's a roar out there. You know, the bees are just tearing them up. And so these kind of alliums that do that are really good. Oh, and I'm hoping Meredith was able to make walking onion and bunching onion pickles from the flowers. So that's another way to use them and let them go to flower and see it as an advantage. Leeks, you can let some go to flower. They're not going to be good eating, by the way, if you let them go to flower. But I bet you there'll be some really nice corms down bottom because they'll have been in a long time. So you could probably reproduce from them pretty easily that way. Once again, all of these guys don't do well with weed problems, and they want enough nitrogen. I have in the past overdone nitrogen in a big way as a grower, but not anymore. I've learned my lesson. But enough is critical. You know, if you don't have enough nitrogen, yeah.
What type of nitrogen do you use?
Good question. The ideal nitrogen is going to be from your cover crops. You know, that mineralized stuff that the plant gets when it wants it. If we don't have that, alfalfa meal is probably, if we just want to have a little bit of a boost when it's going in the ground, I like alfalfa meal because it's got some nitrogen, but it's not like a really big hit. It's going to be slow release, and there's also sugars in there, right? And those sugars are going to help get the microbial life going. But the truth is, if you need nitrogen early in the season, then that stuff isn't likely to do very much. I kind of take my lumps at that point and just wait and let them like be a little bit nitrogen deprived until it warms up some. Because basically, when the soil's really cold still, the only one that's really likely to have a big impact is going to be Chilean nitrate. And I bought a bag of it down there because I thought I should try it, but I've never yet tried it. You know, it's just like, yes, you can use it in organic. You can only use a small amount. You have to justify why you're using it and show how you have a plan not to keep using it because it's not really renewable. Yeah.
What about worm castings?
Worm castings actually with rain there'd be some soluble nitrogen with the rain that they'd be able to use right away. But once again, they're not going to be as much because it depends more on the, you know, the thing about Chilean nitrate is if it hits the root can just take it in, you know. And there's some of that coming off of worm castings, but a lot of what's in there, which is what we always want to use anyways, it's how we should feed our plants, needs the microbes to get that food, you know. And so for me, you know, I just like accept that, I didn't get my food right. You know, I didn't get my soil food web right, and there's going to be this little lag before things pick up. You know, but then once it warms up, I can top dress with things like, you know, the Symphony organic poultry manure if I need to, or more alfalfa meal. I used to use feather meal, which is slow release, but then I read that, and it's not a surprise, where do we put the heavy metals in our body? We put them in our nails and in our hair, right? Well, where do the heavy metals in chicken food go? In the feathers. You know, so I don't really want to use a lot of feather meal anymore.
What about water soluble nitrogen, like Fish emulsions.
Fish emulsion, yeah, there's some of that is going to be good too, though that's still, some of that's going to depend on, a higher proportion is going to be microbe, but foliar feeding it, and then so foliar feeding. The other thing is though, in that time when you have deep cold, even if you are a little nitrogen deprived, you want to be careful. Because if you overdo it, and then you get some hot weather, but then it gets cold, sharply cold again, you could give your plants a major setback. You don't want to encourage rapid, lush growth. I'd say up into April. Sometime in the middle of April, I started to get more confident. But I can tell you about a year when I walked out the end of the third week in April in Silo and looked at my kale, collards, broccoli, everything dead. Because we had a couple weeks of 80 degrees, and then it went to like 19. So you just want to be. I've learned since then to watch the weather more carefully. That what was in order that night was row cover. Row cover, everything would have lived. But it might have been harder, if it was literally going from like within a matter of a day or two, from being in the 80s to a night that was below 20. If I had given a lot of nitrogen, I might have needed row cover and plastic to get that to go through. And indeed, if I'd had leeks out, they would have been hammered too. It wasn't that the things aren't hardy. I mean, kale, collards are very hardy, but they just can't take that kind of a shift. Everything needs to be able to get used to it. Scallions, that fancy name there, fistulosum, but it can also be, of course, the storage onion, just grown smaller, as we said already. They are really a great crop because there's so many different ways to grow them, and they're a great fill-in crop. You can put them in places that are going to later be taken up by winter squash or taken up by bigger broccolis or stuff like that, and so you get to have them. And I really encourage people, which we don't do enough here. Whenever I do it, it's always really satisfying. I love having tons of green onions. It's just like you can make a dish that's kind of bland and then just chop up some green onions at the last minute, toss them in, just stir them with a little bit of heat, and it all just pops. So I highly recommend that. And that would be, growing the regular onions and putting those out, or growing an onion that specifically is developed for that. Like white spear is one that Johnny's recommends. I think I mentioned it down there, yeah, as being heat resistant. So you could do that around your squash in the summertime. You just start a couple flats, and as you're putting your squash out, of course, there's a theory, and I think it holds a little bit of water. I think it's utterly bankrupt when it comes to marigolds. The whole theory of marigolds is they keep bugs away because they stink so bad the bugs can't find it. And my response is only the bugs that aren't hungry can't find it. Meanwhile, they stink so bad the bugs won't feed on the flowers, and of course you want the bugs to feed on the flowers because there's good bugs and bad bugs, and the more diversity the better. Having onions around, it might help a little bit to confuse those pests. I wouldn't count on it, but it wouldn't be bad to have them. And it's a way, as the squash is getting bigger, you can just have concentric rings. Put your biggest ones close, pull those out kind of young, and have smaller ones further out. And you could have pretty steady harvest from a space that otherwise is just going to waste. And it might make you pay attention to that space more so that the bad weeds like nutsedge don't come in and give you a hard time. It's pretty easy to lose control. At least twice it is for us. There's a lot to do, and weeding is nobody's favorite. So evergreen hardy here is actually, it's mentioned in all the catalogs as being grown and used as a scallion. They're not leaving one behind there. They're just, and then it'll overwinter. It does really well that way. But I always say, if you've bothered to grow it, why not plant it thick and leave a couple, and then you've got them. And then a strategy that I like to use, I've already mentioned the importance of mycorrhizae for your onions. Well, I just attended a talk by Trad Cotter from Mushroom Mountain, who wrote the wonderful book about mushrooms. He was talking at the Southern Sod concert this year about we don't need to be buying our inoculants. In fact, they're often not as viable as we want. I mean, maybe you use them a couple of times, but then once you know that you have those plants performing really well, they probably have that those spores on the plants. And so I listened to him and I said, so really, we should probably inoculate our plants this year too, and then sometime at the end of their season, right before they would all be done, walk out and find the biggest, healthiest, nicest plants, pull it up, cut the roots off, save that soil. And he said, you're a really innovative grower, Pat. That's exactly what you should do. So we don't need to buy that mycorrhizal inoculum all the time, but if we do that, we can have it. And what I've always thought is something like evergreen hardy bunching onion, inoculate that. You're going to always have it. If you leave one, it's going to be on the one. As they regrow, you'll have it. So they took, it wasn't mycorrhizae, I thought it was, but they moved another organism that defends plants by moving onions. So Photoptha capsicum is a waterborne, terrible disease, right? I mean, just like if you get it in your pepper or squash or bean field, you can watch the whole thing go down in a matter of, it could be a couple acres, it could be gone in a day or two. You know, it spreads by surface water and it's not going away. You know, it's a really bad disease. We actually got it and really impressed the extension agent because our soil was so diverse that it spread way slowly. And I didn't know. When I first learned about it, they weren't saying it affected beans. So we planted beans on it 2 years after we had it, and we got a successful crop. So organic methods, it's about competition. I'm sure the organism's still there, but we had so much other life that it wasn't taking off. And why it did get established, because it comes in on surface water. Well, we were watering with surface water, you know. So we got it, but the reason we got it was 2013. The soil was so wet all the time that the life wasn't there. Literally, this garden, twice, I think Jeremy said, during this incredible rain that I was in Spain for, thankfully, Jeremy said twice the garden wilted down. You know, and I saw that happen at High on Lake a couple times when there's so much rain that there's no room for oxygen in the soil. You know, and then when the rain drains away, the plants come back. But you know the soil life is damaged that way. You know, so in this film you can see that the Japanese were growing in very wet soil. I mean, they were working soil that we would never work. But it's probably just the conditions they had. And they were growing squash, and the pathogen was Photoptha capsicum, which is a really tough one, right? And of course they would have it in that wet soil, especially if they're working it like that because they're damaging the soil life, right? And what they did was they had a patch of onions that had this, I think it was a beneficial protozoa. It was some organism that I wasn't used to being beneficial. But it was there, and by planting the onion, one onion next to each squash, they show, because they used fluorescent dyes to show it, they show the pathogen growing towards the squash, and then the beneficial microbe growing out towards it, surrounding the pathogen and eating it. You know? And like, you want to buy that pathogen? I can tell you how much it costs, because I have some of those, that beneficial, I have downstairs $240 worth of pre-stop, which is a beneficial organism that I'm going to talk about for controlling diseases. It's like 8 ounces. You know? I mean, you know, it's expensive, but if you can grow it, you know, if you can establish it on your plants, you know, so likewise, Mycorrhizae will not only make water available to onions, make phosphorus available to onions, right? It'll also defend plants against pathogens. And it does it mostly, I think, by exclusion, just by growing so abundantly that the pathogen doesn't have room to get in there. But it does it. And so what I say is take those perennial onions, the bunching ones in particular, and make sure you inoculate those. And make sure that they're a booming patch so you know you have the good mycorrhizae. And then keep it there all the time. And then when you're planting something else, you don't have to cut the soil off and put it on. Just plant a couple of green onions in the bed. And they'll get the interaction with the roots, and pretty sure soon it'll spread, and you'll have your mycorrhizal interaction. You know, and so that to me is the future, you know, of how we want to do it. The longer I grow, the less convinced I am that this, like, you need this much space and this much space, and if you don't space things well, the plants aren't going to do well. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've seen plants do spectacularly well that were grown close together. Usually it's not the same kind of plant. Like, there's only so many of one nutrient there, but plants tend to complement each other. So if you've got onions in spaces where something else is growing, it's probably complementing it, you know? And you can always control it, right? If you look and say, oh my God, I think the onion's competing, well then you eat the onions. It's not a problem. But meanwhile, the mycorrhizae has jumped off, you know it has, onto that squash. And as you take away the competition, you're leaving behind the mycorrhizae. So to me, it's a great plan. White Lisbon and deep purple, and the Nebicon, or 3 that I put up there, there's plenty, and I guess the 4, then the white spear for different reasons. The deep purple because it's a pretty color, and the white Lisbon because it's just your classic, it's the one that most people are going to grow, readily available for just regular run-of-the-mill scallions. And then the Nebicon, I've never grown it, but I was reading about it, and boy, they say the flavor's pretty fancy, so I'm gonna give it a try. We'll see what it does, you know. And then my solution to heat is to just grow them younger and do rotations. But to be honest, I haven't done that in about 10 years. I just kind of give up on them in the heat of the summer. So I'm thinking I should get some of that, and then I can keep putting them out, because I do like being able to come down to the garden and grab some green onions. And sometimes we've really hit whatever, if we have a batch. Right now our batch of hardy bunching are in a greenhouse over at Grandview, though I did bring a little planter full that I have here. But you know, if I'm not there, then I might as well have some other kind of onion here. Though long term, I'd like to see us have a patch at every garden of those kinds. Chives, I'm not going to try and say that Latin name, but you can read it. They're grown as an herb. I mean, they don't have to be treated as an herb. I don't know if anybody that ever saw the Highland Lake Inn Garden, but we had a patch that was about the size of this counter, you know, and it was just like, except for on the occasion when black aphids got in there, which devastated them, it just boomed. And so, once again, because we really, I mean, a lot of places talk about it, but back then we really actually were putting a lot of food from the garden on the plate. And we did it by growing things that were easy to grow, that were there without a lot of work, and then making the chefs use it. I mean, literally, my boss would say to the chefs, your pay raise depends on using this. You know, because they don't want to. I mean, you know, how many chives can I use, you know? I can't use all these green, oh, my pay raise depends? I can do this, I can do that, you know? So one of the things they figured out, I think actually Lark, who was a member of the family, figured it out, and he was motivated by the spirit of it rather than the pay raise, was they put huge amounts of chives in mashed potatoes. The potatoes were green, you know, and they tasted wonderful, you know. And so you're not using it as an herb at that point, it's a vegetable. And of course, it's very good for you. It's one of the ones that's high in the allicin, you know. So if I'm saying that right, and I probably am not, allium or whatever it is. Anyway, that's, you know, to me, the level you can use chives at. Once again, they could be one that you inoculate it and then move little clumps around. They're so easy to move. And you can harvest them all the time. So the blossoms are really not only good for beneficial insects, but they really brighten up a salad. But don't get too carried away because they're strong. Don't think they're milder. I don't know if you've noticed that about blossoms. The blossoms actually tend to taste stronger, of the same taste that the plant has, usually. You know, and so you're going to have a good, strong taste from that blossom. But they're pretty as can be. And I guarantee you, there's going to be different nutrients and complementary nutrients in those blossoms. So it's a good idea to pay attention to them. Cut and come, again, is what I really love about them. Just, you know, it's a little bit more of a pain in the summer because, of course, you cut a big bunch and you're pulling 5 or 6 of the stalks out. But it's not that much trouble, you know. And then, of course, if you let those stalks go to seed, you've got handfuls of chive seeds. You can just scatter them around. And there's plenty of places where they'll take. And so they can be something you can endlessly propagate. And you can be kind of like, you know, a little take them for granted. You know, they could be in some place where you want to put something else in and you just pull them out and you give them away because you haven't got time to deal with them at the time. It doesn't matter because you have so many more around and such an ability to propagate them that, you know, they're one of those ones, like potato onions, that's just like, once you got them going, if you pay any attention at all, they're an endless supply of food. And you can eat a lot of them. There are times when we're in between onions. And I'm not buying onions. I'm just picking lots of chives. Mostly, it's kind of my ethic to not buy vegetables from the store. You know, just because I can and because I want to, and I want to learn how to. They also, of course, are feeding the beneficial insects. Because they have such a long flowering time, that's really great. I didn't mention, when I mentioned problems, they are prone to get hit by a black aphid. Anybody ever have black aphids? Are they not a pain in the butt? Are they not hard to get rid of? I mean, sometimes it seems like the only way to get rid of them is wait till the next spring. And then lots of times they won't come back, but sometimes they'll come back. You know? So I have gotten rid of them because I had to at the Highland Lake Inn. And I've done it by putting ladybugs on them, but I have to cover them with row covers so the ladybugs can't get out because they don't like the taste of them. You know? If I don't want to do that, I can buy pre-fed lacewings. Lacewings are so voracious, they'll eat anything. That's why they put their eggs out on little stalks, because they eat their brothers and sisters. And they'll actually clean it up without having to be covered. But otherwise, those are the 2 ways I've gotten control. I've tried soap, knocks them back, but you can't get the soap everywhere. You know? They just come out and they they just decimate those things. You know, it's really frustrating. So I'd say that probably biological control is the control for that. And if you see them, don't think they're going away. Don't think you can hose them off. Don't think you can control them with soap. Get those beneficials on them right away, because it's going to take less beneficials and give you control more quickly than anything else. You know, this is not something. There's some things like, and I actually advocate, like with brassicas and stuff. You could take 40% loss from cabbage worms on your brassicas, and the production will actually be at least equal, if not better, and the nutrition will be greater. You do not want to think that way about these guys. You want to get them when they're at 10%. You know, you want to be vigilant because they're really a tough little bug to get rid of. I think it might be the same thing that gets on nasturtiums. I might be wrong, but they're just as hard to get rid of on nasturtiums. And once again, I think that the volatiles in that nasturtium are what make things not willing to eat it. You know?
It's not what gets on mint, is it? Is that a mite?
No, I don't think it is what gets on mint. No, no. It's that black aphid, and it's just, ooh. I've seen it, and I take it very seriously. I don't want, because it'll tear up any allium. So you don't want it to jump from your chives, which is where it often shows up, to other alliums. So you want to take it very seriously. And you can buy ladybugs. You can also, by the way, if you have friends who complain about ladybugs in their house, offer to come over with a dust buster and collect them. Put them in jars and keep them good and cold. Moisten the, put some kind of breathable fabric on top or paper and moisten that a little bit so they can get a little bit of liquid once in a while, and just leave them in the fridge. And you can keep them in there for a long time, well into the next spring. And then you can put them out in modest numbers. It's a mistake to think the more I put out, the better, because they look at each other and think, I'm out of here. This is too crowded. Even if I can eat here, my kids are going to get eaten by other ladybugs, because they'll eat their own eggs. So they won't stick around. You want about 1 or 2 per infected plant, and that's about it. And then if you are using ladybugs, you want to put cover over it and make them stay there. And once they lay their eggs, the larvae, you don't have to worry about covering them. They're not flying. They're going to stay there. They're going to be entrained. They're going to wake up hungry. They're going to look around, and all there is black aphids. So maybe you could have them come back the next year. Maybe you could actually, maybe that's why I had problems only once in a while. Maybe I entrained a race of, the multicolored ones that get in the house, and they kept coming back for a few years. Because for me, it was never a yearly thing. It would be these episodes. And the first 1 or 2 I didn't take seriously, and I was really sorry. But after that, I learned to jump on them, and they weren't as big a pain. But it's one of the things I recommend a lot of vigilance with.
Do the thrips not bother those?
They're so vigorous that I've seen damage, but it hasn't been, severe, And we don't have to, since you mentioned thrips, we'll just cover that now. I was going to cover it, the problems part. Thrips mostly shouldn't be a problem if you have good biodiversity. There should be things like aureus and sidiosis, the minute pirate bug, that are feeding on them. And so you should get control that way. But they can be a problem when it gets hot and dry. They really like that. And their biggest time of problem for us is right when the cover crops and the grasses are getting tall. Because then we're cutting them down, and they're in the grasses, and they're in the cover crops. So we cut them down, they got to go somewhere, So they move into the alliums, So not letting them get tall, not letting them become harborage for those guys, keeping them cut down around places where you have alliums might help. But I say that, and the truth is, that's easier said than done, because we want our cover crops too, But maybe being ready for that, at that time, that's when you're likely to see thrip pressure. And then you can knock them back with soap even. Soap and neem is very effective, And that's something that, I'll do. I don't like that. I always prefer to get biological control. I don't have to do it. Spraying is one of my least favorite things to do, It is actually, I prefer to weed than to spray. So I don't like to spray, But sometimes that's what you have to do, and with thrips, that's when it gets to that point, that's what I have to do. Now, what I can say is, if you're someplace else, you have a large crop of oats that are in flower at that time. If you learn to identify minute pirate bug, you can possibly collect a lot of those. I was with Richard McDonald one time when I worked at Gaia Herb Farm, And I got to be in their lab, which is not easy to get to be because it's really sanitary kind of place and all that. And they were processing the milky oats. We saw hundreds of dollars worth of new pirate bugs on the windows because they were on the oats and they were just trying to fly out. So maybe you just bring your oats into the house, put them on a table, and look at the windows in an hour or two and see who's there. You can then move those to where the thrips are and they will prey on them. And so that might give you control. You can, I don't really advocate a lot of that, trying to like move the bugs around yourself, but once in a while you can be a little strategic and make it work. And it might be worthwhile with thrips. Thrips, I had a crop of garlic that I lost to thrips, but I was clueless. I didn't even know thrips were a problem. And so by the time I figured it out, the leaves just weren't there. They were just so pale you couldn't believe it. They had just been rasped to death. Thrips don't eat the leaf, they rasp it, so they make that kind of silvery mark. And there was more silver than green on those garlics, and I lost a garlic crop, That's how you become an expert, right? Make enough mistakes and you're an expert. Okay, shallots. I gotta tell you folks, I struggled. I spent more time on this crop than any other. Why? Because I hardly grow. I've grown them a bunch of times and never got a very good crop. And I always thought, I just didn't grow them well enough. But the truth is I gave them the same care I gave onions and stuff. They should have done better for me. And then lo and behold, researching for this thing, I noticed in a few catalogs they talk about the fact that they're day length sensitive. And what do all the catalogs that talk about day length adaptability say that they're adapted for? 40 degrees north to 60 degrees north. What are we? 35.39. They're not exactly ideally, the ones that we can buy, ideal for here, And indeed, we're actually kind of in a dicey place, because we're moving kind of away from short day into long day. So we probably really want to dial that in. Just start being in communication with countries that have similar latitudes where they grow them and find some varieties that are suited to here. I'm excited though because I think I mentioned Ira Wallace was kind enough to send me a bunch of things to trial. We're going to go look at them. And she sent me, I think, 3 different shallots and 2 of them didn't do very well at all. But the copper, which must be the skin color because it's definitely got purple on it. And there's not much skin left after all that rain. It did very well. And I got, I think, two of them here. And like I say, we're going to, during a break, I'm going to do a little cooking. And we're going to do a taste test on them. The other ones, I couldn't get enough to test. They just didn't make much of anything. And I suspect, because I just wrote to her about it today. I didn't think to write to her about it till today, but there might be a response I might look and see on the break. I'm wondering if the copper is more suited to our latitude. It certainly tolerated the rain more. And so that might be, an advantage right there. So I think it was a combination. I can't really say that it was just latitude since we had less than ideal conditions. But they didn't do very much. I've done best with them, planting them in the fall. They've gotten bigger and giving me more, but still. And then I just have to confess, I didn't know how to use them. I guess I used them like onions because the recipes that I saw them calling for shallots were recipes where you cooked them. And to me, once you've cooked them, I can't tell enough difference to bother with something that's harder to grow. Now an advantage for growing them is they're going to keep a lot longer than other bulbing onions. And that's partly because they're denser. And another big advantage is they essentially, not quite, there's variations of 10 or 15%, but essentially they're twice as nutritious as onions. Including in those really important things like quercetin and the other antioxidants. So that's a reason to actually grow them. They're concentrated nutrition. So should we see an interruption in our food supply, having the ability to grow a lot of concentrated food, come that time, we're not going to care about how much work it is to grow something. We're not going to be doing a whole lot else. So we're going to be wanting to grow the things that are, as loaded with nutrients as possible. And shallots are up there. And that probably means they're up there in flavor too, and I just don't know how to cook them. I think I'm a pretty good cook, but I didn't get them right, And I intend to readdress them starting today with my egg test. So we'll see if there's an agreement that there's a noticeable difference. How many people do grow shallots here? And do you notice a difference when you cook with them?
I noticed my failure rate's real high.
I'm sorry, what?
I noticed my failure rate's real high.
Think that's got to do with latitude. What about you?
I got some from Glenn Davis, Janine's husband, and I harvested some, I cooked them, we ate them, they were good, I didn't cook them very long. Then the rest of them, I left in the garden, they came up this spring. So they're little plants still, we'll see.
But you had a decent harvest from the ones you put in?
Yeah,
So you might have a variety that we want you and Glenn to share around.
I have to ask Glenn.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. But it might be a short day length one. I wouldn't be at all surprised that Janine would find, one that does better because she's about specialty crops, and that sure is a specialty crop, But when you cook them, you actually notice enough difference between them and onions to make it.
Yes, you can't cook them long.
That's what I'm doing wrong. Yeah. I'm just like not understanding how they're supposed to be cooked. And I'm real bad for looking at recipes, the ingredients, but not reading the directions. They probably say, don't cook them too long, and I'm like, cook them like onions, and then, they don't taste like anything but onions. So I confess, I was going to really bash these guys. I was going to say, I can't tell the difference. I personally don't think they're worth it. I learned that I didn't know the difference, so I'm going to play with it and see what I can figure out about them. But because they also haven't done that well, I haven't given them much time. I probably have tried growing them 10 or 15 times over the last 30 years, but yeah.
Yeah, I've been growing shallots for a number of years, and they do incredibly well at my place. I'm up about 3,000 feet. I think I'm using Dutch yellow.
Okay, now that should be one of those ones that supposedly wants the long days. I mean, Holland is way up there,
I mean, I've still got shallots that I harvested last summer, and they're looking great.
That's what
I really like about them. They last so long.
That's a reason why I have to learn to grow them, right? Dense nutrition that keeps well, That's a real winner, So, yeah, I think we're at that time. I think it's break time. Okay.
Shallots to you is not an attitude, it's a latitude. I think there was a song about that.
I guess that's a song, yeah, except for he may have the exception, but there's always an exception to prove the rule. And maybe we need those genetics too, So think about sharing those genetics out to the rest of us. Then again, maybe we have to grow it at how many, 3,000 feet? Yeah, we're in a bowl here, so that might be a little, it's a different environment. Okay, let's take a break.